On an unverified date, although likely sometime in January of 1861, Abraham Lincoln wrote what is now arguably one of his most insightful works as to the foundations of his political and moral ideologies. This was a personal note, now entitled and publicized on Lincoln's writings through the House Divided Project, as Lincoln's Fragment on the Constitution and the Union. He wrote this in reaction to an exchange with Alexander H. Stephens. Stephens was a congressman hailing from Crawfordville, Georgia, and an old friend of Lincoln's from days working together as Whigs in Congress. The two were engaged in an exchange by mail in late 1860 to early 1861. At this point, Lincoln had been elected as the first Republican president of the United States just 1 month prior, and it was at about this time when South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. Tensions among the United States were high, and it wouldn't be long, by February 1st, that 6 more states would secede from the Union. Many Southerners claimed that secession was rooted in a fear for the dissolution of states' rights under the new administration, although it was clear that they refused to stick around for the new president to endanger their institution of slavery. Not only did they feel that slaves were essential to the success of the Southern economy, but racist ideologies were seemingly innate throughout the majority of the nation. Lincoln's socially liberal principles predicted progression towards racial equality throughout the nation, which was an inconceivable future to most Southerners. On November 14, 1860, just 5 days following Lincoln's election, Congressman Stephens traveled to Milledgeville, Georgia, to acknowledge the expanding sentiment for secession in his state. "My object is not to appeal to your passions, but to your reason. In my judgment, the election of no man, constitutionally chosen to that office, is sufficient cause to justify any state to separate from the Union." Stephens was counseling Georgians against a hasty decision for secession. Lincoln's election wasn't yet an infringement upon their constitutional rights, despite what some pro-secessionists argued. Stephens' proposal, instead, was to delay the threat of secession until the Republican president did violate these rights, specifically until he actively attempted to interfere with the institution of slavery. About 1 month later, Congressman Stephens received a letter from the president-elect, headed with the phrase, "For your own eye only." Lincoln wrote to Stephens to commend him for his speech in Milledgeville, but Stephens was quick to initiate the necessary conversation regarding the state of the Union. In a fairly cordial and respectful exchange, Stephens warned Lincoln, "The country is certainly in great peril, and no man had heavier or greater responsibilities than you have in the present momentous crisis." Stephens went on to respectfully but firmly remind Lincoln that he lacked the power, under the Constitution, to interfere with slavery. Lincoln's response to Stephens was somewhat disingenuous, which is something that can't be said for many of his known exchanges. Lincoln wrote Stephens in assurance that Southerners had no reason to resent his administration, as he had no intention to interfere with the institution of slavery, either directly or indirectly. Lincoln's Fragment on the Constitution and the Union, however, revealed the contrary. He despised slavery and the morals that maintained it. He believed that universal equality was the fate that was intended for the nation by the Founding Fathers. His political ideologies were founded upon the Declaration of Independence, a document that, as he saw, blatantly condemned slavery and, even further, advocated principles that would render this necessary evil, as the Founding Fathers called it, an unnecessary one for the self-governing, independent nation that they had founded. In this note, Lincoln proclaimed his devotion to the Declaration of Independence, and in turn to the message of the Founding Fathers, that a self-governing body can only survive if it's true to liberty, not selfishly, but upon principle. The liberty that is so emphatically outlined by the Declaration was the end to which the Constitution and the Union were the means. Historian Lucas Morrell advocates for Lincoln's point. Because the liberties each person possesses by nature are not self-enforcing, the mechanism by which these liberties were to be protected becomes especially important. Lincoln's note began as such. "Without the Constitution and the Union, we could not have attained the result. But even these are not the primary cause of our great prosperity. There is something back of these, entwining itself more closely about the human heart. That something is the principle of liberty to all, the principle that clears the path for all, gives hope to all, and by consequence, enterprise and industry to all. Lincoln referred to those unalienable rights endowed by the Creator of men, as stated in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One of the biggest challenges that he faced during his presidency, however, was to clarify the meaning of liberty, as it was intended by the Founding Fathers. In a speech to the Women's Central Association of Relief in Baltimore, Maryland, on April 18, 1864, Lincoln identified the large-scale distinction between liberty in the Union and in the Confederacy that created their mutual hatred in the Civil War. With some, the word liberty may mean for each man to do as he pleases with himself and the product of his labor, while with others the same word may mean for some men to do as they please with other men and the product of other men's labor. Lincoln believed that as long as slavery persisted, liberty could not. In a lengthy response to the president-elect, dated December 30th, 1860, the Georgia congressman alluded to Proverbs 25:11 of the Bible, to urge Lincoln to somehow deliver a message that would placate the remaining Southern states. A word fitly spoken by you now would indeed be like apples of gold in pictures of silver. While not a man of vehement religious beliefs, Lincoln certainly understood Stephen's allusion. However, in his Fragment, manipulated it to suit his own purposes. The assertion of that principle at that time was the word fitly spoken, which has proved an apple of gold to us. The Union and the Constitution are the picture of silver, subsequently framed around it. The picture was made not to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn and preserve it. The picture was made for the apple, not the apple for the picture. The image of the Declaration as the apple of gold, framed by the silver Constitution and Union, has become highly controversial among historians. Many are disenchanted by Lincoln's willingness to prioritize the Declaration above the Constitution. Conservative historians Wilmore Kendall and Gottfried Dietz, among others, argued this allusion as Lincoln's demolition of the Constitution in order to pursue dictatorial glorious president and put himself in Washington's place as the father of his country. Lincoln's favor of the Declaration over the Constitution is unequivocal, and his expression of this in political action is, undoubtedly, his attempt to manifest morality in politics, as he believed the nation was meant to be governed. Historian Carey T. Birch seems to more accurately identify Lincoln's purpose in emphasizing his belief that, without guidance of the Declaration's values and principles, the Constitution would continue to function as no more than an amoral legal framework. So let us act that neither picture or apple shall ever be blurred or bruised or broken. That we may so act, we must study and understand the points of danger. Lincoln called upon the people to respect and obey the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Union. As he claimed, the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. A universal understanding of liberty, in its true sense, would squander any notion for such blasphemy. Lincoln's Fragment on the Constitution and the Union provided major insight into his reaction to Southern secession following his election to presidency. These thoughts of his were never revealed so cohesively as in this note. However, his eventual triumph in achieving nationwide moral and political change was largely a result of his compelling public discourse. Lincoln wasn't naive as to expect a Union victory in the Civil War to dissolve racist sentiments throughout the country. He recognized that pragmatism in politics was the way to accomplish de jure equality in order to create the path that would one day lead to de facto nationwide liberty. His re-election to presidency in 1864 confirmed that it was common understanding that he was the man capable of leading the nation to this fate.